The City of Albuquerque Public Art Urban Enhancement Division and Department of Arts and Culture proudly present Take Another Look. Built on the foundation of two city ordinances, Art in Municipal Places, and the Urban Enhancement Trust Fund, the Public Art Urban Enhancement Division provides funds to artists to create art for the public, as well as arts organizations for arts and cultural programming. Join us as we discuss everything related to funding artists in the public realm with host Joni Palmer.
Hello, I'm Joni Palmer, and welcome back to Take Another Look at Albuquerque's public art. Thank you for tuning in today for our next set of episodes, the past three episodes, the first of 2025, focused on the city's Urban Enhancement Trust Fund, UETF, and the unique residency it offers. Today we start a new set of episodes about appreciation and appropriation in public arts in New Mexico. During this set, I will be talking with public art staff, city staff, consultants, community members, and artists. In this episode, we will center Indigenous perspectives and focus on three key terms: awareness, vulnerability, and resilience. My guests for today, episode number 20 of this podcast series, are Elsa Menendez, Deputy Director of Arts and Culture, Noel Begay, Associate Public Art Project Coordinator, and Dillon Shije, Deputy Director of the Office of Equity and Inclusion. So thank you all for joining me today in the studio.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of my three guests. We're lucky to have three people here joining us to kick off this set of episodes. So Elsa is the Deputy Director of the City of Albuquerque's Department of Arts and Culture and a core trainer for Sonderworks /DAC for the Albuquerque Community Safety Department, training all incoming ACS first responder behavioral health teams. This work incorporates conflict management, communication tools, and techniques for building a healthy, inclusive organizational culture while exploring active listening, the neurobiology of safety and threat and bias awareness. Elsa has spent more than 35 years working in theater around the world as a writer, director, producer, and performer, including serving as an artistic director and core artist of Trick Clock Company and producer artist liaison of the Revolutions International Theater Festival, which ran for 23 years.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And maybe we'll get some more information about some of these trainings that you do.
Sure.
Okay, so welcome back, Noel.
Hi.
Noel Begay is the Associate Public Art Project Coordinator for the City of Albuquerque's Public Art Urban Enhancement Division. She has joined us before. This time, she will share more about her continued work reversing dominant colonial culture by centering Indigenous perspectives and beliefs through two powerful arts summits.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Yad A Donaldscho Noel Begay in a share, the Bethlehem in Nishla, Tachini Bushes Chin, Oge Dashache, Dado, Tabahan Dashanella, Nan George de Nasha, Bedil Dasanil Shagan, Akut Ego Asta, Danasta, Dishla. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Good to be back.
Yeah. And our last guest is Dillon Shije. He is the Deputy Director for the City of Albuquerque's Office of Equity and Inclusion, OEI. Dillon joined the city as a councilman and tribal leader from the Pueblo of Zia and a founding board member of the Pueblo Development Commission, NGO. Dillon is a dedicated advocate for Indigenous rights, environmental justice, and the advancement of Native health. He is passionate about furthering the perspectives of the Pueblo peoples of New Mexico across global Indigenous issues.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming in. All right. Okay, so I'll give as I typically do, a preface to this conversation. So why are we having this conversation now? Why is it important? So I want to start with two references. The first is a recent article in High Country News, April 2025. It's titled, "The Importance of Indigenous Curators. These caretakers can help ensure museum collections are handled and expanded appropriately." This article highlights the lack of Indigenous peoples in the art world, specifically as curators of museums with Indigenous collections. Notable in the article is that despite the 1990 passage of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, also known as NAGPRA, which requires museums that receive federal funds to repatriate ancestors and objects taken from Native American sites. Despite that, a staggering number of institutions have ignored the law. In the article, they state that the ongoing lack of Native curators at these institutions exacerbates the problem. What are the reasons why Indigenous curators are so few in numbers? According to Tani Atone, a curator at Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, she's an enrolled citizen of the Kiowa Indian Tribe of Oklahoma and a descendant of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma and the Muskogee Creek Nation. Some of the reasons that she says, quote, "Many of us come from rural communities with low economic backgrounds, which makes it tough to land curation jobs. Few students can afford to take low-paying internships, valuable to most institutions. They can't pay for city housing or gain entree into the philanthropic circles that lead to prestigious jobs." But she goes on to say that our inherent knowledge of American Indian art is very valuable to most institutions because we have lived the history of our people and understand the origins and meanings of our people's artistic traditions. Additionally, with few Indigenous curators in place, there's a lack of mentorship for emerging Native curators, and that's just starting to change. The second piece I want to mention is recent and ongoing scholarship exploring the complexities of appropriation. The question of appropriation or appreciation is very complicated. Jana Katian and Richard John Stopford, in a 2023 article in Philosophy and Social Criticism, pose a couple provisional definitions that I thought might be useful today. Cultural appreciation, according to the authors, is typically understood as mere exploration. Appreciation explores whatever is already there, whereas cultural appropriation is commonly defined as the taking of something produced by members of one culture by members of another. They note that one might think the difference is easy. They are cases of appropriation if one uses or takes other cultural materials, that is, if they appropriate it. If, on the other hand, one does not use but merely acts as an audience, as it were, then this is appreciation. Some of the language the authors mention, reverence, using, plagiarizing, donning, encroachment, taking, using, and profiting from, are part of this complicated relationship. However, this conversation can't just happen in rarefied spaces. Conversations and dialogue need to happen within our communities amongst artists, administrators, elected officials, and community members. Brief note, I use both the terms dialogue because dialogue typically implies a more structured or purposeful exchange, while conversation is broader and often more casual. That is, dialogue may have a specific goal like negotiation or resolving conflict, while conversation is more about sharing information and connecting. We need both. The terms that guide our conversation today, awareness, vulnerability, and resilience, will hopefully start both dialogue and conversation. So, let's dive into what each of you do, and we'll start with you, Dillon. Can you tell us a little bit more about what is the Office of Equity and Inclusion?
Well, the Office of Equity and Inclusion was created in 2018 under Mayor Tim Keller's administration to focus on creating a more just, inclusive, and equitable city for all residents. Currently, we hold 4 current population offices: Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, Office of Black Community Engagement, Office of Native American Affairs, and then the Office of Financial Empowerment. And right now, we're newly creating an office which is going to it's the Office of Asian Pacific Islander Native Hawaiian. So we service all these populations, do direct community engagement, seeing what the challenges might be within those set populations, and we do the best that we can to provide resources, change policy. We also work to address, systemic barriers to those opportunities. Looking at closing the racial wealth gap, providing language access. Also, we provide equity and cultural sensitivity workshops across city government. And we work to collaborate with city departments to integrate equity into programs, policies, and service delivery. But also, one of the key things is partnering with community-led organizations, as they also have that expertise and that lived experience.
So within all of that, that's a lot. It sounds like a robust program. What do you do as the deputy director?
So as far as my duties and responsibilities, I oversee the key operational areas within OEI, including our comms and marketing, financial management, data and analytics, and organizational cultural change initiatives. One of my key focuses is strengthening internal systems, enhancing transparency, and building community trust through data-driven, culturally responsive initiatives, and then also support and advise the population offices when needed. So a lot of different things there, and do outward facing as well, but mainly internal operations.
Okay. Well, that too is a lot, not just what the whole OEI, but also your position. How did you come to be involved in the city's Office of Equity and Inclusion? Well,
actually, I first became aware of OEI through a professional colleague I met during a leadership fellowship. Their work and experience with OEI resonated deeply with my own values and areas of advocacy, which led me to explore ways to become involved and ultimately join the team. So that's where I'm here.
And then also, what is your background? Because I'm thinking about people who are saying, wow, he's doing a lot of stuff. How did he grow all of this expertise?
So prior to coming here to the city of Albuquerque, I worked at the National Congress of American Indians as one of their liaisons. So I had direct engagement with tribal leadership throughout Indian country, working with 574 federally recognized tribes and their leadership on advocacy strategies as well. And from there, I also serve as a tribal councilman outside of this capacity, and looking at indigenous advocacy, also public health. I have a very big interest in a specialization within public health for our Native health constituents, and also looking at economic development strategies as well under the NGO and the organization called Zia Impact LLC that I was part of prior to joining the city. And so a lot of robust knowledge. I also serve as the Southwest representative for the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, as well as Southwest delegate for the Tribal Interior Budget Council under the Department of Interior. So advocating on key budget priorities for our tribal nations and having that voice at the table in those two capacities.
Well, thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
All right, Elsa, it's your turn.
I just want to ask Dillon 10 more questions.
Right?
His background and his
I wish we had more time.
We need more time.
So you're the deputy director of the city's Department of Arts and Culture. So what does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah, so Arts and Culture is a very large department in the city. We're, I think, the 4th or 5th largest in the city. And we oversee multiple divisions, including including the biopark and all of the libraries in town, as well as the Balloon Museum, the Albuquerque Museum, the Public Art Program, the Media Arts Program, and special community events, and also some other partnerships. So we are a big department. As a result, we have 2 deputies, and each of us as deputies kind of oversee certain divisions. I used to oversee public art as one of my primary divisions until about 6 months ago, and we sort of switched things around because of a change in leadership. But essentially, I get to interface with some of the different divisions in town and offer support in all the ways that I can in terms of ensuring that they're getting the resources that they need through City Hall, and also showing up at events and making sure that we're in contact with the community. I'm also the community liaison with our department. So in other words, if there is a community group or an individual who has an idea that they want to try to connect with the Department of Arts and Culture, we have lots of different ways to do that, but sometimes none of the ways they've tried is exactly what they were looking for. So they can also make appointments with me to come and talk about ideas that they have for things they'd like to do in town.
So that's a shout out to listeners.
It is.
And so there was a little bit of background in your bio that you have a theater background.
I do, yeah.
What else have you done that brings you to this position?
Yeah, so my background is in theater. I'm a trained theater artist and circus artist, but actually most of my life, I've also shown up as a teacher and facilitator. And so I have lots of trainings and certifications in different kinds of facilitation and coaching. But in the last 25 years, I spent about 17 years at the National Hispanic Cultural Center as an outreach coordinator and then the education and performing arts director there.
Okay.
Then I spent about 3 years with Senator Heinrich, and then came over to the city into this role. So I'm also a person who works at the sort of intersections of creativity and facilitation and advocacy and social justice, and have a lot of passion for all of those areas. And I feel like arts and culture is a good place to see those meld.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, thank you. So, Noel, in episode 14, we talked about your role with the city's public art program and some of the initiatives you were working on. You've been doing a lot of work since then. Can you tell us a bit about the panel discussion that was part of the Artist Summit on March 15th, and why you were involved with Exploring Native Symbolism and Allyship Summit, Importance of Native Representation in the New Mexico Artistic Community, which is going to be on May 3rd?
Hi, yeah. So March 15th, that summit was really interesting. I only had 45 minutes a part of this other rollout from the Art Census project that we've also talked about prior. I was a part of this at the capacity of, again, 45 minutes, having a discussion. I tried to figure out a way to tie it into the Art Census and giving some data on it. However, one of my colleagues and I, it was a lot of discussion on how we went out and did tribal outreach to the capacity that the city of Albuquerque hasn't done. We went, Mandolin, shout out to her. We went northwestern New Mexico to reach out to Navajo or Dene Nation, and went to all these chapter houses and, pretty much put our name out there and said we actually want more involvement from Indigenous artists who feel like there's this barrier between like a formal governmental system and other call for artists where there's smaller galleries, or their involvement with smaller galleries and local galleries. But we were trying to make this awareness of, regional calls. You can, I guess, as I'm referring back to like my personal life of when I was younger and how my family encouraged me to do art. They just kept telling me, you can do whatever you want in life, pursue what you need to pursue. You're always going to come from a good place and put that out into the world, but you're always going to come home and give back to your community. And this was a part of what I was doing. We all have different roles in life, and especially traditionally, I really leaned on what can I do for my community. So a part of that March 15th summit was giving the data about what happened with that and how there's this definition of efficiency with the city. And they were essentially, I felt pressure because, again, it was like my first year, really, how far can I take this project? And I think it was self-imposed pressure, but again, I think it's mostly because I was new, and I was like, how many chapter houses can I really drive to and create this awareness for? And so we went into that data, how many we actually made it to, how many we didn't make it to, even half of what I wanted. But again, there's just these barriers, there's these learning curves of
You're just getting started.
Even myself, I'm just starting this kind of awareness and it's so new and not a lot of people understand how to go about it, but it's much to what you were saying earlier, is like Indigenous communities and Indigenous and Native curators are important because we're the ones who grew up this way. We understand that system, government system back home, but trying to meld it with the Albuquerque city government system as an urban Indigenous and an urban Native person. It's just something so new that we're just figuring out now.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about, well, the sign up for the May 3rd event is closed, but can you tell us a bit more about what this event is going to be? Yeah.
A lot of my positionality here in the city is with May 3rd. It's this learning curve and trying to understand how I can give back to my community as a Dene woman, but also I can't forget the other Native communities that we should be representing within the city. A lot of that is our Pueblo culture, but because I'm not Pueblo myself, I need to find allyship with those Pueblo Nation, Pueblo tribes, and creating this conversation for artists to know what they can incorporate into their projects and what they shouldn't. To me, it's very straightforward. Again, because I grew up with all of these songs and dances and all of these teachings. And I have to really think outside of that. And it's pretty difficult because, again, for me, it's straightforward. I see you're nodding your head, Dillon. It's like, we just know, it's right. Just respectful. You don't take somebody else's culture. That's just, it's inherently known. Because, and I think a lot of that is because we're constantly reinforced and told, you are who you are, this is where you come from, and just represent you and your people.
Well, carrying on from that point, so why awareness, vulnerability, and resilience as kind of headliners to this conversation? What do they have to do with what we're talking about?
So for me, I worked on, again, another project we mentioned before, which is the Sunport. And a lot of my learning for creating this communication was trusting myself to being open. So with the Sunport, a lot of me looking at the applicants and helping that committee understand what symbolism was appropriate in these proposals was very key to me learning and understanding how to communicate that with non-Indigenous people.
Okay, so I'm going to ask all of you, and I'll just kind of broadcast it out and talk amongst yourselves, is, so how do we define these terms, and how are they useful in this endeavor? right? So awareness, vulnerability, and resilience. They're tough words to define in a really kind of specific way, but how is it that each of you use those terms for yourself, but also when you're out there working with communities?
And that's a good question, and it really depends on context too, right? You know, you can have cultural awareness and sensitivity and being informed on some of the protocols that a certain tribal nation or tribe has when it comes to not only art but just working with them as well. Awareness to me, you know, it's also understanding and recognizing the realities within and around you, being present and having your own perceptions and being intentional and impactful, but also understanding kind of like the systems of power at play too. So that's kind of how I see it.
How about you, Elsa?
I love that definition of awareness, and I think what I would add, because again, it is all very contextual, I would add that it also includes for me an understanding or a willingness to investigate our own biases and to be to be truthful with ourselves in that investigation. You know, I think sometimes we shy away from things that make us uncomfortable or make us feel defensive, and for me, awareness includes opening up that conversation, and it links to vulnerability in that way too. It includes opening up our awareness to our own biases that are part of who we are for multiple different reasons, but in order to be able to really investigate the historical context and the cultural context, we have to also be open to those.
Yeah, that connection to vulnerability seems really important, and it's something you've mentioned, many times in our conversations. So for you, how do you define those terms? And then let's throw resilience in as another round.
Vulnerability for me, I see it more as I just spaced it. It's more of a strength than a weakness. And I think that this kind of conversation couldn't have happened 10 years ago, let alone, my other ancestors previously for that. But it's funny that Elsa's, I love the way you speak about like challenging your own biases. That's when I hear, again, like resilience, chiming in with resilience. I find it hard to hear that word personally, and it's because, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't like lose my my space here, but it's my elders and ancestors did not suffer boarding schools. They did not suffer relocation efforts and genocide from the U.S. government. They did not fight for this country as co-talkers in spite of every mistreatment the government has dished out. They did not ultimately survive all of that for me to be here today to let disrespectful travesties of appropriations happen. That's what resilience is to me. It's the survival of blatant injustices. And so when I hear somebody say like, oh yeah, you're resilient, and they're talking about, or they're coming from a privileged space and they're not necessarily talking in that context, for me, I find it difficult to be empathetic towards that when they're like, I'm resilient because I quit coffee for 2 weeks, or,
Go ahead.
One of the things that I wanted to add to that too is also like maintaining your purpose and integrity within all that, which is a challenge. And it's adapting to that change, being vulnerable. Like as I said earlier, I don't see that as a weakness. It builds that trust and connection with people, but also kind of helps define you as a leader as well. Kind of gives you that authenticity. And grounding yourself, opening yourself up. And as shared, we have a lot of historical and generational traumas. And when you dive into that, it can get really emotional. And so there's a lot of ways that, art also helps amplify and create recovery too and healing in the long term.
And so this will take us to our last question is, how are you thinking about using this language to educate, support, and empower city staff, elected officials, artists, and community members about Indigenous and Native representation, as well as appropriation and appreciation? So how are you going about that? It seems a pretty difficult task.
Well, as shared at the beginning, it's like having those direct conversations with tribal leadership. One of the hard challenges is that if you don't have access to that, it can be really time consuming too. And so building allyship, communicating with, relatives within communities is really important. Like Noel and myself, we've been having this dialogue about how do we create that space for our tribal leadership and those that are doing work within the community or within the state to have those conversations with tribal leadership and religious leaders, because every art has a story to it. It tells our story as people, and to take that and misconstrue it or alter it and manipulate it sets a different precedent into space and amongst one another. So it has to be with respect and acknowledgement.
Elsa, how is it that you are incorporating this into some of your trainings as a liaison, that sort of thing?
I think the big thing is to keep in mind many things, which is that it is important that we are in dialogue and in conversation about the need for us to be putting energy and attention toward centering, in this particular case, but in many cases, indigeneity and indigenous voices within the context of this conversation about art versus appropriation. Appreciation versus appropriation. And, to create opportunities in which we can have those kinds of conversations and those kinds of dialogues and lift up voices without asking our Indigenous members of our city staff and community to also do all of the emotional labor of holding the space and explaining things and being always the leader. So there's a balance, I think, between making sure that we're keeping space open for voices, but also not asking always our Indigenous leaders within our communities to be the ones that are teaching everyone how to have these conversations. So I think that's a big important thing. And I think, again, we need to invite people to lean into the places that they're unsure of and to be okay with being unsure, and to recognize, again, that vulnerability and being open is important. And I think those are some of the ways that we're doing it. We're trying to create more spaces and make sure that we have more representation, so that the concerns and experiences are expressed and represented in our different divisions and in our city.
And I want to say one thing is, like, the fact that vulnerability for me is I'm trusting that non-Indigenous people will see that I'm occupying the space in conversation in a respectful yet confrontational way, because I'm calling out what needs to be challenged, like in cultural intellectual property. We talked about this in the last episode that I was a part of with the misappropriation of the Zia sun symbol. That, again, belongs to Zia Pueblo. That belongs to them at its fullest extent. And me calling in someone from that Pueblo, such as Dillon, and having these conversations on the side, and how do we approach all of that and bring people in without hurting people's ego and privilege is super interesting in that intersectionality happening. I don't know if you wanted to add on to that a little bit, Dillon.
No, I think you hit it right on the nail. Cultural intellectual property is the epitome of it all. That comes from my tribal nation and its utilization as far as ceremony is sacred. And sometimes to see it out there, it can be disheartening, but also depending on that appreciation component, you know, there's a lot that goes with it as far as like I said, the traumas, and then enduring that up to this point, and then looking at, you know, how do we heal from that with making sure that it's utilized in a respectful manner.
Right.
And I'm very appreciative of Noel to be doing this work and doing that outreach. I think it really sets the precedent on what things respectful as far as going through the protocols that we hold traditionally, traditional protocols to go through the Pueblo and the tribal leadership itself. So I'm very thankful for that.
Well, we have to wrap up. I know that we could talk about this a lot more, and we will in upcoming episodes, but also in some of the summits that you are organizing. So just to wrap up, this conversation is probably new territory for a lot of our listeners. Any resources you would like to share?
I'll include it in the newsletter. I didn't get a chance to list out more like I did last time.
Right.
But I can give that in the newsletter.
So check out our newsletter.
And to begin, you know, you can look at the All Public Council of Governors out of the Indian Public Cultural Center for outreach and to kind of help facilitate that outreach for anybody that's listening to work with tribal nations.
Okay, thank you. Elsa, anything?
I would just encourage people also within the city, city systems to be in contact with the Office of Equity and Inclusion. I think they're doing a really amazing job.
Thank you. Especially as the Office of Native American Affairs as well.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
We support you.
Yeah, we support you. You're amazing.
Well, to all my listeners, if you would like to reach out to Noel, Elsa, or Dillon, if you have any questions or have ideas, as Elsa was saying earlier, as her position as a liaison, Elsa's email is EMENENDEZ at cabq.gov. Dillon's is Dillon, SHIJE at cabq.gov. And Noel's is Noel Begay at cabq.gov. So stay tuned for our next two episodes. Our next episode in May will be about community resilience, reflecting on the impacts to organizations and artists. And in June, we'll be talking about moving forward, the City and the Sunport Initiative. So thanks again for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so, dear listeners, to learn more about the Office of Equity and Inclusion, go to the city's website and just look for OEI. For Department of Arts and Culture, you can go to cabq.gov/arts and culture. And then the same as I've said many times before is for public art, cabq.gov/public art. So you can find all this information along with lots of other resources in our newsletter, so you can sign up on the Public Art webpage. So thank you for listening. I hope you will join us for our next episode, which will be released in late May. And we hope that after you've listened to this podcast that you will take another look at Albuquerque's public art. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To learn more about the Albuquerque Public Art Program, the Public Art Collection, opportunities for artists, and so much more, visit cabq.gov/publicart. To learn more about the Urban Enhancement Trust Fund, visit cabq.gov/UETF. Tune in next time to take another look at the City of Albuquerque Public Art Urban Enhancement Division.